I never thought I'd be the one with the power to foreclose on my own mother's house. The text message glowed on my screen, a digital plea from a woman who once told me I wasn't worth the space I occupied in her home. Emma, please. We're 3 months behind. The bank is sending letters. Bob lost his job. We need $5,000 just to catch up. Sitting in my corner office, 30 stories above Seattle, I stared at the message for a full 5 minutes. Outside my window, the Puget Sound stretched. Into the distance, sunlight fracturing across its surface. 10 years earlier, I had arrived in this city with nothing but a backpack and $237 to my name. No high school diploma, no support system, no home to return to. I placed my phone face down on my desk and turned to my computer. With 3 clicks, I pulled up the mortgage account for 1472 Willow Creek Drive, Portland, Oregon. The familiar address appeared alongside a series of late payment notifications, the most recent stamped with a pre-foreclosure warning. I didn't need to search for the mortgage holder's name. I already knew what it said. Emma Chen Holdings, LLC. My mother had no idea that for the past 8 months, I'd been the one receiving her mortgage payments. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The day my mother kicked me out wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming fight, no slamming doors. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October, rain pattering against the kitchen windows of our Portland home. "You can't keep living here, Emma," my mother said, sliding a small stack of 20s across the kitchen table. "Bob and I have discussed it, and with the baby coming, we need your room." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. At 16, I was quiet, studious, and rarely home. I spent most evenings working at my grandparents' restaurant, saving for college while maintaining a 4.0 GPA. The baby she referred to was unexpected. Her new life with Bob taking yet another turn I wasn't prepared for. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice barely audible. My mother avoided my eyes, focusing instead on folding a dish towel with precise movements. "You're smart. You'll figure it out. You've always been independent." Behind her, Bob lingered in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. He'd never liked me, the living reminder of my mother's previous marriage to my father, who had died when I was 7. For 3 years, Bob had been chipping away at the already fragile relationship between my mother and me. And now, with a baby on the way, he had the perfect excuse to remove me entirely. "I'm 16, I said. "It's illegal to kick out a minor. I'm still in high school." My mother's expression hardened. "Don't be dramatic, Emma. We're not abandoning you. We're just accelerating your adulthood. The money will help you get started, and you can stay with a friend until you figure things out." I didn't tell her I didn't have friends whose parents would take me in. I didn't remind her that the money she'd pushed across the table wouldn't cover 1 month's rent anywhere in Portland. I simply sat there, the weight of her betrayal pressing the air from my lungs. "How long do I have?" I asked. "Bob's sister is coming to help with the nursery this weekend," my mother replied. "So, Friday." 3 days. I had 3 days to figure out where to go and how to survive. I didn't cry as I packed my belongings into my school backpack and a single duffel bag, taking only what was essential: clothes, my laptop, important documents I'd had the foresight to keep organized. The photograph of my father and me at the coast, the only one I had, went into my jacket pocket, close to my heart. As I prepared to leave that Friday morning, my mother was already painting what had been my bedroom, the windows open to disperse, the fumes, country music playing from her phone, the smell of new beginnings, fresh paint covering any evidence I had ever existed in that space. "I left the house key on the counter," I said from the doorway. My mother turned, brush in hand, a streak of pale yellow paint on her cheek. For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered across her face. "You'll be fine, Emma," she said, her voice softer than it had been in days. "This is for the best. You'll see." I wanted to ask, best for whom? But I didn't. I simply nodded, shouldered my bags, and walked out the front door of the only home I'd ever known. That evening, as rain soaked through my jacket, I sat at the Portland bus station, a one-way ticket to Seattle in my hand. I had an address scribbled on a piece of paper, a youth shelter my school counselor had discreetly provided when I'd confided in her. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched the Portland skyline fade into the gray horizon and made a silent promise to myself. I would never again depend on someone who saw me as disposable. The first month in Seattle was the hardest. The youth shelter was overcrowded, noisy, and sometimes frightening. I kept my few possessions with me at all times, sleeping with my backpack as a pillow. During the day, I haunted public libraries, using their computers to research GED programs and job opportunities. Within weeks, I had secured a position at Rainy Day Coffee, a small cafe 6 blocks from the shelter. "You're not 18, the owner, Maria, had said, eyeing my application. "I will be," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "And I need this job more than anyone else who's applied." Something in my determination must have resonated with her. She hired me that day, offering cash payments until I could sort out my documentation issues. It was at Rainy Day Coffee that I met Harry Williams, a regular customer who came every morning for black coffee and a blueberry scone. Harry was in his late 60s, a retired software engineer who had been part of Seattle's early tech boom. He noticed me reading coding tutorials during my breaks and struck up a conversation. "Teaching yourself to code?" he asked, sliding into the booth across from me. I nodded, wary of the attention. "That's a tough road without guidance," he said. "I could help if you're interested." Over the following months, Harry became the mentor I desperately needed. 3 mornings a week before my shift, we'd meet at the cafe, and he'd guide me through programming concepts, review my practice projects, and assign new challenges. When he learned about my living situation, he connected me with a program that helped homeless youth find stable housing. By the time I turned 17, I had moved into a tiny studio apartment subsidized by the program, obtained my GED, and started taking online courses in computer science. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at the cafe and evenings doing data entry, for a local business Harry had connected me with. Every cent that didn't go toward immediate survival went into my education fund. I didn't call my mother. I didn't check if she'd tried to find me. The wound was still too raw, the betrayal too complete. Occasionally, I'd dream of the yellow nursery that had replaced my childhood bedroom and wake up with tears drying on my cheeks. On my 18th birthday, Harry took me to dinner at a nice restaurant overlooking the water, the kind of place I'd only seen from the outside. "I have something for you," he said, sliding an envelope across the table after our meal. Inside was an official letter offering me an internship at Nexus Solutions, a growing tech company where Harry had maintained connections. "They're looking for hungry young talent," Harry explained. "I showed them some of your projects. They were impressed, Emma. This is legitimate. You earned it." I started the internship 2 weeks later. The pay was modest, but it was more than I'd ever made at the cafe. More importantly, it was a foot in the door of an industry where skill and determination could outweigh formal credentials. Years passed. I moved from intern to junior developer to team lead. I completed my degree online while working full-time. I made friends, built a network, created a life. The pain of my mother's rejection didn't disappear, but it receded, becoming a dull ache rather than a fresh wound. I never planned to look back. Seattle was my home now. I had an apartment with a view, a career on the rise, and even a relationship with Michael, a UX designer I'd met through work. The lost, rain-soaked teenager at the bus station seemed like someone from another lifetime. Then, on an ordinary Wednesday 7 years after I'd left Portland, an email notification changed everything. "Emma, it's Mom. Please call me when you—" "Get this. It's important." I stared at the message, my chest tight. How had she found my email? What could possibly be important enough to break the silence after all these years? Curiosity won over caution. I called the number she'd included. "Emma, is that you?" Her voice was exactly as I remembered, perhaps a touch more strained. "It's me," I replied, professional and distant. "Oh, thank goodness," she sighed. "I've been trying to find you for ages. I need to talk to you about something." "Difficult. Bob's had some health issues and we're struggling. Zoe, your sister, she's starting college next year, and we just can't manage everything." Sister. The word felt foreign. The baby who had replaced me would be a teenager now. A sister I'd never met. "What are you asking for exactly?" I kept my tone neutral, though my hand gripped the phone tightly. "We need help, Emma." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Financial help, just until Bob can work again. We're behind on bills and the bank. They're not being very understanding. The irony wasn't lost on me. The people who had decided I was an inconvenience at 16 were now approaching me for support. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "I need to go now." I hung up before she could respond, my mind racing. That evening, I told Michael about the call, about my history. Parts of my past I rarely discussed. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his hand warm on mine. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore it, to let them face the consequences of their choices the way I had to. But another part is still looking for closure, he finished. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I researched my mother and Bob. It wasn't difficult. Social media provided glimpses of their lives, my half-sister's high school achievements, Bob's job at a manufacturing plant, my mother's hobby of gardening. They looked like a perfectly ordinary family. More importantly, public records showed their financial situation. The house on Willow Creek Drive had a second mortgage taken out 3 years earlier. There were tax liens, medical bills, classic signs of a middle-class family barely staying afloat. I could have sent money. A few $1,000s would have been nothing to me now. But as I stared at their mortgage information, an idea took shape. One that would give me something money alone couldn't buy. Control over a situation where I had once been powerless. Through a series of carefully structured LLCs, I purchased their mortgage from the bank. It was a complex transaction that required financial advisors and attorneys, but within 2 months, I legally owned the debt on my childhood home. Every payment they made would come to me. Every late notice would be issued under my authority. I didn't tell my mother. I simply waited and watched as they continued to struggle, making minimum payments when they could, falling behind when they couldn't. I received notifications of each transaction, each missed deadline. For 8 months, I remained in the shadows, a silent creditor collecting data rather than immediate payment. I learned their patterns, their struggles, their financial habits. I saw when Bob briefly returned to work and when medical bills forced him back home. I observed my mother's desperate attempts to keep their home by taking on part-time work at a local department store. Then came the text message that began this story, my mother reaching out directly, begging for $5,000 to save their home from foreclosure, a home I now had the power to take away. Looking at her message, I realized I stood at a crossroads. The path of revenge was clear and justified. I could foreclose, forcing them from their home just as they had forced me from mine. An eye for an eye, a roof for a roof. But as I sat in my Seattle office, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd built without them, I understood something profound. I was no longer the powerless 16-year-old desperate for security and love. I was Emma Chen, senior developer at Nexus Solutions, homeowner, mentor to other young coders, woman of means and influence. I didn't need revenge. I needed resolution. I picked up my phone and typed a response. "I'll be in Portland this weekend. We should talk in person." The journey back to Portland was surreal. The city had changed, or perhaps I had. Streets that once held my entire world now seemed smaller, buildings less imposing. As I pulled my rental car into the driveway of 1472 Willow Creek Drive, I felt strangely calm. The house looked tired. The once bright blue paint had faded to a dull gray blue. The garden my mother had always meticulously maintained was overgrown, in places, bare in others. A basketball hoop hung at an awkward angle over the garage. My mother opened the door before I could knock, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had aged more than the 10 years that had passed, her hair now completely gray, lines etched deeply around her eyes and mouth. "Emma," she breathed. "You came." Behind her, a teenage girl hovered uncertainly. Zoe, the baby who had replaced me. She had our mother's eyes, wide and dark. "Come in," my mother said, stepping aside. "Bob's resting, but he'll be glad you're here." I doubted that very much, but I entered anyway, taking in the familiar layout now cluttered with a decade of a life that hadn't included me. Family photos lined the walls, Zoe's school pictures, holiday gatherings, vacations. Not a single image of me remained. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had slid those few 20s toward me and changed the course of my life. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. "You look successful," my mother said, her hands fidgeting with a paper napkin. "I always knew you would be." I placed my briefcase on the table and removed a folder. "Let's not pretend this is a family reunion," I said quietly. "You contacted me because you need money. I'm here because I want closure." My mother's face fell, but she nodded. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank is threatening foreclosure. Bob's medical bills." She trailed off, glancing toward Zoe, who had positioned herself by the doorway, listening. "We've tried everything." I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "This is your mortgage statement." She frowned, confused. "Yes. From Pacific Northwest Financial, they've been—" "Look at the letterhead on the most recent notice," I interrupted. She did, her eyes narrowing as she read. "Emma Chen Holdings? I don't understand." "I own your mortgage," I said simply. "I purchased it 8 months ago through an investment company I established. Every payment you've made, or missed, has come to me." The color drained from her face. "Why would you? How could you afford to?" "I did very well for myself. After you decided I was no longer welcome in this house," I replied. "I'm now in senior management at a tech company in Seattle. I own my home outright. I have investments, savings, security. All the things you denied me the chance to build here." Zoe stepped forward, her teenage face a mask of confusion and indignation. "Who are you to judge my parents? You don't know what they've been through." I turned to her, seeing both my mother and a complete stranger in her features. "You're right, Zoe. I don't know what they've been through. Just as they never bothered to find out what I went through after being kicked out at 16 to make room for you." My mother flinched. "Emma, please, not in front of her." "Why not? Shouldn't she know the truth about her parents? About how they treated their first daughter when she became inconvenient?" Tears filled my mother's eyes. "We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I've regretted it every day since you left. And yet you waited 10 years to reach out. Only when you needed something." I reached back into my briefcase and removed a second document, placing it beside the mortgage statement. This is a modified loan agreement. It restructures your debt, lowers your interest rate, and forgives the late payments. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for the paper. I don't understand. I'm not here to take your home, I said, my voice steady. I'm here to make something perfectly clear. I survived without you. I thrived without you. And I am no longer defined by what you did to me. I stood, smoothing my jacket. The new loan terms begin next month. Make your payments on time, and you'll never face foreclosure. My contact information is in there if you have questions, but otherwise, our business is concluded. As I turned to leave, my mother rose from her chair. Emma, wait, please. Can't we try to fix things between us now that you're back? I paused at the door, looking back at the woman who had once been my entire world. I'm not back. I'm just passing through. Seattle is my home now. With those words, I walked out, feeling the weight of the past lifting with each step. In the end, I hadn't chosen revenge or even forgiveness. I had chosen something else entirely: freedom. As I drove away from Willow Creek Drive for the final time, I realized that the power had never been in owning their mortgage or in having the ability to take their home. The power was in recognizing that I no longer needed anything from them. Not their approval, not their love, not even their remorse. I had built my own home, created my own family of choice, and written my own story. One where being cast aside at 16 wasn't the end, but merely the difficult beginning of a journey toward becoming exactly who I was meant to be. I thought my story had reached its conclusion that day in Portland. I thought I'd close the chapter on my past with the same quiet dignity I'd carried through a decade of building my life. But life rarely provides such clean endings. 6 months after my visit to Willow Creek Drive, as Seattle's summer faded, into a golden autumn, a notification appeared on my phone. A payment had been made to Emma Chen Holdings. On time, in full. My mother and Bob had been diligent with their restructured mortgage, never missing a payment since our encounter. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office when my assistant knocked on the door, her expression unusually hesitant. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she's insistent." A Zoe Miller? The name hit me like an unexpected wave. My half-sister, the child I'd never known. "Send her in," I said, closing my laptop and straightening my posture. Zoe entered cautiously, shoulders squared with determination despite her obvious nervousness. At 17, she was a striking blend of my mother's features and Bob's coloring. Tall and slender with dark eyes and light brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a University of Washington sweatshirt that seemed intentionally chosen for this visit. "You're a hard person to find," she said, stopping a few feet from my desk. "Your address isn't listed anywhere, and your company's reception is like Fort Knox." "That's by design," I replied, gesturing toward the chair across from me. "Please, sit." She settled into the chair, taking in my office with undisguised curiosity. The awards on the wall, the view of Elliott Bay, the tasteful furnishings that conveyed success without ostentation. "Mom doesn't know I'm here," she said abruptly. She'd probably be upset if she knew. But I had to come. "Why?" Zoe pulled a folded document from her backpack, the modified loan agreement I'd left with my mother. "Because of this. Because I wanted to understand." I studied her face, searching for signs of my mother's manipulation, wondering if she'd sent Zoe as a proxy to appeal for even more generosity. But all I saw was the raw intensity of a teenager wrestling with revelations about her family's past. "What exactly do you want to understand, Zoe?" She leaned forward, eyes fixed on mine. "Everything. The real story. Not the sanitized version I've heard bits and pieces of my entire life. Not the vague explanations about how my older sister went to live her own life. I want the truth. The bitterness I'd carried for so long stirred inside me. And why should I revisit painful memories for your benefit? Why should I care about what you want to know? Because I didn't ask to be born, she replied quietly. I didn't ask to be the reason you were kicked out. I've lived 17 years being the replacement child without even knowing it. Her words struck a chord I hadn't expected. She was right. Zoe hadn't chosen any of this. She was as much a pawn in my mother and Bob's narrative as I had been. Fine, I said after a long moment. I'll tell you what happened, but not here. Are you free for dinner? We met at a small Japanese restaurant near Lake Union, a place private enough for difficult conversations, yet public enough to keep emotions in check. Over miso soup and tempura, I told Zoe the unvarnished truth, not to hurt her, but because she deserved to know the reality of the family she'd grown up in. She listened intently, asking occasional questions, but mostly absorbing the story of her older sister who had been erased to make room for her. When I finished, she sat silently, tracing patterns in the condensation on her water glass. I found a photo of you once, she finally said. I was 12, looking for Christmas decorations in the attic. There was a small box pushed way back, in the corner. Inside was a picture of you and Mom at what looked like a school event. You were wearing a science fair ribbon. I remembered that day clearly. 8th grade, my project on solar energy had taken first place. My mother had been proud then, before Bob, before everything changed. Mom caught me looking at it, Zoe continued. She took the box away, said it was private, but I kept wondering about you, the sister no one would talk about. And now? I asked. Now that you know? Zoe met my gaze, her expression a complex mixture of sadness and clarity. Now I understand why there's always been this shadow over our house, this unspoken thing. Mom looks at me sometimes with this expression I could never figure out. Now I know she's seeing you, the daughter she threw away. The bluntness of her assessment was startling. That's a harsh way to put it. But accurate, she countered. They made a choice and it was a terrible one. I've been living with the consequences of that choice without even knowing it. We fell silent as the waiter cleared our plates. I studied Zoe across the table, seeing elements of myself in her directness, her determination to face uncomfortable truths. I'm applying to colleges, she said as we waited for the check. UW is my first choice. Computer science, actually. I didn't even know about you when I got interested in coding. For the first time that evening, I smiled genuinely. Apparently it runs in the family. Would you? She hesitated, then pressed on. Would you be willing to look at my application? Give me feedback? I could use someone with actual experience in the field. The request was so unexpected, so normal in its simplicity, that it caught me off guard. Here was this girl, my sister, asking not for money or forgiveness for our parents, but for mentorship, for connection on our own terms. I'd be happy to, I found myself saying. Send it to my email. As we parted outside the restaurant, Zoe hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. Will you ever forgive them? Mom and Bob? I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't really about them anymore. It's about me choosing what to carry forward and what to leave behind. I don't hate them, Zoe. I just don't need them. And me? She asked, vulnerability plain on her face. Where do I fit in all this? That's up to us to figure out, I replied honestly. You're not responsible for their choices, and you're not obligated to fix what they broke. But if you want to know your sister, well, I'm right here. She nodded, something like hope flickering in her expression. I'll send you my application tomorrow. True to her word, Zoe's college application arrived in my inbox the next morning. I reviewed it carefully, impressed by her clarity of thought and academic achievements. She had inherited my aptitude for mathematics and logic, though her interests leaned more toward artificial intelligence than the security systems I specialized in. Our correspondence began professionally. My suggestions for strengthening her personal statement, tips for her upcoming interviews, resources for preparing for the rigor of a computer science program. But gradually, our exchanges evolved. She sent me a paper she'd written on ethical considerations in AI that had nothing to do with college applications. I shared an article about a programming competition I thought might interest her. Small, tentative steps toward something neither of us could quite name yet. 3 weeks after Zoe's visit, my phone rang with my mother's number. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. "Emma? It's Mom." "I know," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Is everything all right with the mortgage payments?" Yes. Everything's fine with that." She paused. "I'm calling because Zoe told us she came to see you." I tensed, preparing for accusations or manipulative guilt. "She did. She said you've been helping her with college applications. I just wanted to say thank you." The simple expression of gratitude was so unexpected that for a moment, I couldn't find words to respond. "You don't need to thank me," I finally said. Zoe's bright and determined. She reached out to me on her own. "She's a lot like you," my mother said softly. "More than you know." The comparison stirred complicated feelings. "Is there something specific you needed, Mom?" She sighed, the sound heavy with unspoken regrets. "No, Emma, I hope you know that seeing you succeed, knowing you're doing well despite everything, it matters to me. It would have mattered more if you'd supported that success, instead of pushing me out to fend for myself," I replied, the words emerging before I could temper them. "You're right," she said, surprising me again. "You're absolutely right. Nothing I can say now changes what we did. But Zoe told us everything you shared with her, and I need you to know that she was right too. Not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted the choice we made." I remained silent, unwilling to offer absolution but acknowledging her words with my continued presence on the line. "Bob's health is improving," she continued after a moment. "The new medication is working. We're managing the payments. I didn't call to ask for anything more, Emma. I just wanted you to know that we're grateful. For the loan modification, yes, but more for being willing to know Zoe despite everything." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen window watching ferries cross the Sound, turning the conversation over in my mind. There had been no demands, no attempts at emotional manipulation, just acknowledgement and gratitude. Small offerings, certainly, but perhaps sincere ones. 2 months later, in early December, an email from Zoe lit up my phone. She'd been accepted to UW with a partial scholarship. Not enough to cover everything, but a significant recognition of her abilities. Her excitement leapt from the screen, and I found myself smiling as I typed my congratulations. "Would you be willing to come to dinner?" she wrote back. "Nothing fancy, just at home." I know it's a lot to ask, but it would mean a lot to me. The invitation hung in the digital space between us, heavy with implication. Going back to that house, sitting at that table, not as the unexpected creditor but as the invited guest, the thought made my stomach tighten with anxiety. "I don't think that's a good idea," I started to type, then stopped. Was I protecting myself from genuine pain, or was I clinging to old wounds that no longer served me? In the 10 years since I'd left Portland, I'd built a life that no one could take away. I had financial security, professional respect, a relationship with Michael that was moving toward permanence. The frightened 16-year-old who'd boarded that bus to Seattle no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who had proven her strength beyond any doubt. Perhaps it was time to prove that strength in a different way. "I'll be there," I replied. "When?" The week before Christmas, I drove south on I-5 toward Portland once again. This time, Michael came with me, his steady presence a reminder that I wasn't walking into my past alone. We checked into a hotel downtown, and I spent a quiet hour preparing myself for the evening ahead. "You don't have to do this," Michael said as we got ready. "You don't owe them anything." "I know," I replied, fastening the simple silver necklace he'd given me for my birthday. "But I think I might owe it to myself. And to Zoe." The house on Willow Creek Drive was transformed from my last visit. Holiday lights outlined the roof and windows, and a wreath hung on the freshly painted front door, signs of effort and care that hadn't been evident before. Zoe answered my knock, her face brightening when she saw me. "You came, and you must be Michael. Come in, it's freezing out there." The interior had changed too. The clutter had been cleared away, surfaces polished, the living room rearranged to create a more open space. In the dining room, the table was set carefully, a small centerpiece of pine branches and candles marking the occasion. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She'd colored her hair since I'd last seen her, the gray, now hidden under a warm brown shade closer to her natural color. Bob followed behind her, thinner than before, but moving with more energy. "Emma," my mother said, uncertainty in her voice. "Thank you for coming." An awkward silence descended. Years of separation creating a chasm none of us quite knew how to bridge. Zoe stepped into the void. "I made the stuffing using Grandma Chen's recipe. I found it in that old recipe box in the pantry. I hope it's close to how you remember it." The mention of my grandmother's stuffing, a childhood favorite she'd prepared every holiday, was such an unexpected gesture that it momentarily dissolved the tension. "You found her handwritten recipe card? With the secret ingredient she always insisted no one could guess." Zoe nodded eagerly. "Ginger! Who puts ginger in stuffing? But it smells amazing." "It is," I confirmed, a genuine smile forming. "It was always my favorite." The dinner that followed wasn't magic. It didn't erase 10 years of absence or heal the deep wounds of rejection. Conversation was sometimes stilted, silences occasionally stretched too long. But there were also moments of unexpected connection. Zoe's excitement about university, Bob's sincere interest in Michael's work in UX design, my mother's careful questions about my life in Seattle. As we finished dessert, a store-bought pie that no one pretended was homemade, Zoe disappeared upstairs, returning with a small wrapped package. "This is for you," she said, placing it in my hands. An early Christmas gift. I unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound journal. Elegant in its simplicity. "Open it," she urged. Inside, on the first page, she'd written, "For new stories. Some families are broken, some are rebuilt, and some are created through choice rather than chance. Thank you for choosing to know me. Your sister Zoe." The P. Words blurred as unexpected tears filled my eyes. I looked up to find my mother watching me, her own eyes wet. "I'm so sorry, Emma," she said quietly. "For everything." It wasn't enough. 2 words could never be enough for what had happened. But in that moment, I realized something crucial. Holding on to my anger was no longer protecting me. It was limiting me. "I know," I replied simply. After dinner, as Michael and I prepared to leave, Bob approached me somewhat hesitantly. It was the first time we'd spoken directly all evening. "I want you to know," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "that I was wrong. About you. About the situation. About everything. I made your mother choose between us, and it destroyed something that can never be fully repaired. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know that I recognize the damage I caused." The admission was so unexpected, so contrary to the controlling stepfather I remembered, that for a moment I couldn't respond. "Thank you for saying that." I finally... As we drove back to our hotel, Michael glanced over at me. "How are you feeling?" I considered the question, searching for the truth beyond easy answers. I'm not sure yet. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't miraculous. It was just a start, maybe. A start sounds good, he said, reaching for my hand. Later that night, as I stood looking out the hotel window at Portland's lights, I realized something profound. The narrative I'd built around my life, abandoned daughter rises from ashes to success, had served its purpose. It had given me strength when I needed it, motivation when the path seemed impossible, justification for keeping people at a distance. But narratives can become prisons if we cling to them too tightly. The victimized teenager and the vengeful, successful woman were both parts of my story, but neither was the whole of who I could become. In purchasing my mother's mortgage, I'd sought control over a situation where I'd once been powerless. I'd achieved that goal and more, but true power might lie in choosing a different path forward, not forgetting the past, but refusing to let it dictate my future. I didn't know if regular family dinners were in my future. I didn't know if my mother and Bob would maintain their changed perspective, or if old patterns would reassert themselves. I didn't know if Zoe and I would develop the kind of sisterhood that overcomes our complicated beginnings. What I did know was that the next chapter of my story was mine to write, not as a reaction to old wounds, but as a creation of new possibilities. For the first time in a decade, I felt truly free, not just from my past, but free to choose what parts of it I might reclaim and transform. As I finally turned away from the window and slipped into bed beside Michael, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I would call Zoe and invite her to visit Seattle for a weekend. I would show her the university campus, introduce her to the coding groups I mentored, perhaps even take her to meet Harry at his favorite coffee shop. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't reconciliation in the traditional sense. It was something more nuanced, the recognition that the family that had once discarded me no longer held the power to define me, for better or worse. And in that recognition lay the most profound freedom of all. Spring arrived in Seattle with an explosion of cherry blossoms and the persistent mist that locals barely noticed anymore. I'd lived in the city long enough to anticipate the seasonal rhythms, the gradual lengthening of days, the way Elliott Bay transformed from winter's steely gray to a softer blue-green as temperatures rose, the tourists beginning to populate Pike Place Market in greater numbers. My life had settled into its own rhythm, too. Work at Nexus Solutions continued to challenge and fulfill me. My relationship with Michael had deepened, our conversations now occasionally touching on shared futures and potential homes. And unexpectedly, my tentative connection with Zoe had blossomed into something I'd never anticipated. True to my word, I'd invited her to Seattle in January to tour the University of Washington campus. Those initial days had been a careful dance of getting to know each other, finding common ground in our shared interest in technology while navigating around the family history that connected and divided us. I'd introduced her to Harry, who had charmed her with stories of early Silicon Valley and offered his mentorship if she chose UW. We'd explored the city together, our conversations gradually shifting from academic plans to more personal terrain. By March, Zoe had made her decision to attend UW, and our relationship had evolved into weekly video calls and text exchanges that ranged from coding challenges to music recommendations to the ordinary updates of our daily lives. She never pressured me about reconnecting with our mother and Bob, and I appreciated her respect for those boundaries. It was during one of these calls that Zoe first mentioned the idea. "So," she said, her face slightly pixelated on my laptop screen, "I was thinking about housing options for fall semester." "On campus is probably best for your first year," I replied, sorting through emails as we talked. "It's easier to make connections and the commute." "Actually," she interrupted, "I was wondering if I could stay with you." My fingers froze over the keyboard. "With me?" Zoe rushed on, words tumbling over each other. "Just temporarily, until I get settled. On-campus housing is so expensive, and I know your place is big enough since Michael moved in. I wouldn't be in the way, and I could help with cooking or whatever." It's just an idea. You can totally say no." The request caught me completely off guard. Having Zoe in my life as a distant sister was one thing. Having her in my home, in my daily life, was something else entirely. "That's a big step," I said carefully. "Have you talked to Mom and Bob about this?" She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture so reminiscent of my mother that it gave me pause. "They're supportive. I think they see it as, I don't know, a chance for me to know you better. For all of us to heal something, maybe." "I need to think about it," I said, "and talk to Michael." "Of course," Zoe replied quickly. "No pressure. It was just a thought." After we ended the call, I sat staring at my reflection in the darkened screen. The prospect of having Zoe in my home stirred a complex mix of emotions. Part of me was touched by her desire to be closer, to build a genuine sisterly relationship. Another part feared the complications that might arise. Would my mother see this as an opening to insert herself back into my life? Would I inadvertently punish Zoe for her parents' choices? Would the daily reminders of our shared genetics but separate upbringings be more painful than healing? That evening, I broached the subject with Michael as we prepared dinner together, in our renovated kitchen, the space we'd designed together when he moved in 6 months earlier. "Zoe asked if she could live with us when she starts at UW, I said, attempting to sound casual as I chopped vegetables. Michael's hand stilled over the cutting board. "Wow, that's a big ask." "It is," I agreed. "She says it would be temporary, just until she gets settled." "And how do you feel about it?" I appreciated that he didn't immediately offer his opinion, but instead created space for mine. It was one of the many reasons our relationship worked so well. "Conflicted," I admitted. "We've been getting closer, and I care about her. But having her here would change things. It would connect me to Portland, to my mother and Bob, in ways I've deliberately avoided for years." Michael resumed slicing chicken with methodical precision. "True. But maybe that's not entirely bad. You've been building this relationship with Zoe for months now. It seems to be positive for both of you." "It has been," I acknowledged. "But living together is different from video calls and occasional visits. There's nowhere to retreat when things get difficult." "You do have a 3-bedroom apartment," he pointed out with a slight smile. "And you're hardly ever home at the same times I am because of our work schedules. There would be physical space, at least." I sighed, sliding the chopped vegetables into a bowl. "It's not just about physical space. It's about what it means. For 10 years, I've defined myself by my independence from that family, by the life I built without them. Having Zoe here feels like, I don't know, like allowing that separation to blur." Michael set down his knife and turned to face me fully. "Emma, you're one of the strongest people I know. You've built an incredible life through your own determination and talent. Having your sister stay with you while she goes to college doesn't erase that or diminish it." "I know that rationally," I said, "but emotionally, it's complicated. Everything with family is," he replied softly. "But maybe that's the point. Family is messy and imperfect. For years, you didn't have the luxury of choosing how to engage with yours because the choice was made for you. Now you do have that choice. Whatever you decide about Zoe living here, it will be your decision this time." His words struck a chord. He was right. The circumstances of my departure from Portland had robbed me of agency. Now I had the power to set terms, to establish boundaries, to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with my half-sister. There was strength in that, not weakness. After dinner, I called Harry, whose wisdom had guided me through so many critical junctures in my life. "The girl wants to live with you," he summarized after I explained the situation. "And you're worried about what that means for all the walls you've built." "Not walls," I protested. "Boundaries." "Semantics," Harry chuckled. "Emma, when I first met you, you were a teenager trying to stand on your own with nothing to fall back on. You needed those boundaries then. They kept you safe, gave you space to grow without interference. But you're not that frightened kid anymore. So you think I should say yes? I think you should ask yourself what you want, not what you fear. Do you want to know your sister? Do you want her in your life? Because if the answer is yes, then maybe it's time to open a door in one of those boundaries and see what happens." After we hung up, I walked out onto the balcony of our apartment, watching the city lights shimmer across the water. 10 years ago, I couldn't have imagined standing here, successful and secure, contemplating whether to welcome a sister I hadn't known existed when I left Portland. Life had a way of presenting scenarios no one could anticipate. The next morning, I called Zoe. "I've thought about your request," I said without preamble. "You can stay with us, but I have conditions." "Really?" Her voice lifted with surprise and excitement. "What conditions?" "First, it's temporary, 1 semester to start. We'll reevaluate after that based on how it's working for everyone. Second, this is between you and me. It doesn't mean I'm ready for regular family gatherings or holidays. Mom and Bob don't have an open invitation to visit." "That's fair," Zoe said quickly. "Anything else?" "Yes. While you're living with me, we're honest with each other. No walking on eggshells, no avoiding difficult subjects. If something's bothering you, we talk about it. If something's bothering me, I'll do the same." "Deal," she agreed. "Thank you, Emma. This means a lot to me." "It means a lot to me too," I replied, surprising myself with the truth of the words. In late August, Michael and I drove to Portland to help Zoe move her belongings to Seattle. I'd suggested shipping everything, but she'd insisted on driving up together, saying the journey itself mattered. I understood what she wasn't saying explicitly, that the act of my returning to Portland one more time, of physically helping her leave the house I'd been forced from, held symbolic significance. The day was mercifully straightforward. Bob was polite but kept a respectful distance, helping load boxes into my SUV without trying to engage me in unnecessary conversation. My mother was quieter than usual, her emotions visibly warring beneath her composed exterior as she helped Zoe pack the last of her bedroom items. As we prepared to leave, my mother handed Zoe a small wooden box. "For your new room," she said. "Something to remember home by." Zoe opened it to reveal a collection of family photographs. Some I recognized from my childhood, others taken during the years after I'd left. To my surprise, the box also contained several photos of me from before: school pictures, holiday snapshots, candid moments I'd forgotten existed. "I thought you might both want these," my mother said, her eyes meeting mine briefly before looking away. It was a peace offering of sorts, an acknowledgement of the past we shared and the years we didn't. I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak, and Zoe carefully packed the box in her backpack rather than in the car's cargo area. The drive north was filled with Zoe's excited chatter about university classes, Seattle neighborhoods, and the coding project she was already working on. As we crossed the Columbia River, leaving Oregon behind, I glanced in the rearview mirror to see her watching the landscape with a mixture of nostalgia and anticipation. "It feels strange," she said, catching my eye in the mirror. "Leaving home, but going with family at the same time." Family. The word still caught me off guard when applied to our relationship, but I was beginning to accept that family could be redefined, reconstructed on new terms. The first few weeks of our new living arrangement passed more smoothly than I'd anticipated. Zoe was conscientious about shared spaces, enthusiastic about exploring Seattle, and genuinely appreciative of the opportunity to live in our apartment. She attended orientation at UW, joined a coding club, and quickly established a routine that complemented rather than disrupted our household. What I hadn't expected was how her presence would affect me. having grown up as an only child until my teen years, and then lived independently for so long. I wasn't prepared for the small joys of having a sister around, someone to share inside jokes with, to recommend books to debate television shows with over breakfast. She brought an energy to our home that I hadn't realized was missing. Michael adapted with characteristic ease, treating Zoe like the little sister he'd never had. They bonded over a shared love of obscure indie bands and terrible science fiction movies, forming their own relationship independent of my connection to her. Of course, there were challenges too. Zoe's tendency to leave half-empty cups around the apartment irritated me more than I wanted to admit. Her late-night study sessions sometimes disrupted our sleep, and occasionally, her innocent questions about my childhood would touch nerves still sensitive after all these years. One such moment came in October, as Zoe and I were cooking dinner, together while Michael worked late. "Did Mom ever make that chicken dish for you? The one with the lemon and garlic that she always did for Sunday dinners?" Zoe asked, reaching for spices in our pantry. "No," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "That must have come after my time." Zoe paused, wooden spoon in hand. "Right? Sorry. Sometimes I forget that we have different versions of the same people." I set down the knife I was using, turning to face her fully. "You don't need to apologize for having good memories with them, Zoe. Those memories are real and valid." "But it's weird, isn't it?" she persisted. "Like, my entire life with them exists because they kicked you out. If they hadn't made that choice, I might not even exist. Or we might have grown up together. Sometimes I feel guilty for having had them in my life when you didn't." The honesty of her observation struck me. It was something I'd thought about but never articulated. The parallel universes of our lives, the what-ifs that could never be answered. "Life isn't that simple," I said finally. "What happened between me and our parents doesn't diminish your relationship with them. And honestly, who knows what would have happened if things had been different? Maybe I would have left for college and never looked back. Maybe we wouldn't be close even if we'd grown up together." "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" Zoe asked, her voice quiet. I considered the question carefully, wanting to give her an honest answer rather than a convenient one. "I think forgiveness is complicated. It's not a single moment or decision. It's a process, and it doesn't look the same for everyone. But you let me into your life," she pointed out. "That's something." "That's different," I said. "You never did anything that needed forgiveness. You were just a baby when all this happened." Zoe nodded thoughtfully, returning to her cooking. "For what it's worth, I think they really do regret what they did, especially Mom. She keeps all your press clippings, you know. Every time your company is mentioned in a tech publication, she cuts it out and puts it in this folder." The image was unexpectedly poignant, my mother collecting fragments of my life from a distance, preserving successes she had no part in creating but still apparently valued. "I didn't know that," I said softly. "Would it have mattered if—" "You did?" Zoe asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. "I'm not sure," I admitted. Maybe not." The conversation shifted to other topics, but that night, lying awake beside Michael, I found myself thinking about my mother collecting articles about my career, about the box of photos she'd preserved, about the complicated reality that people who had once caused profound hurt could also harbor genuine regret. It didn't erase what had happened. It didn't justify their choices, but perhaps it suggested that the narrative I'd constructed, of callous parents who discarded me without a second thought, was incomplete. Not wrong, but not the whole truth either. As fall deepened into winter, Zoe thrived at university, earning top marks in her computer science courses and making friends who frequently gathered in our living room for study sessions. She began talking about applying for summer internships, her confidence growing with each academic success. "Harry says he might be able to help me get an interview at Nexus," she mentioned one evening. "But I told him I'd rather try somewhere else first." "Why?" I asked, surprised. Nexus has an excellent internship program. Zoe fidgeted with her coffee mug. I don't want people thinking I got in because of you. I want to earn my opportunities on my own merits. I recognized the sentiment immediately. The fierce independence, the determination to stand on one's own achievements. It was like looking in a mirror. I understand that, I said. But don't let pride get in the way of good opportunities either. That was a mistake I sometimes made. You? Making mistakes? Zoe teased. I thought you were perfectly self-sufficient from day one. I laughed, appreciating her ability to lighten moments that could easily turn too serious. Hardly. I just had the sense to hide my mistakes better. As December approached, bringing with it the inevitable question of holiday plans, I found myself at another crossroads. Zoe had carefully avoided mentioning Christmas, though I knew she was wondering whether she would travel back to Portland or remain in Seattle. One evening, as we sat on the balcony despite the winter chill, mugs of hot chocolate warming our hands, I broached the subject myself. "What are you thinking about for Christmas?" I asked. Zoe looked surprised by my initiation of the topic. "Oh, I figured I'd go home for a few days. Mom and Bob would be disappointed if I didn't." I nodded, watching steam rise from my mug. "Would you like company for the drive down?" Her head snapped up, eyes widening. "Are you offering to come to Portland for Christmas?" "Not exactly," I clarified. "I'm offering to drive you down and perhaps stay for dinner. One dinner. Not the whole holiday." "Really?" The hope in her voice was palpable. That would be... Wow. Mom would be over the moon. "Don't oversell it," I cautioned. "It's just dinner, and it depends on whether Michael can join us. I haven't discussed it with him yet." "Of course," Zoe agreed quickly. "But still, it's a big deal, Emma." It was a big deal, though I tried to downplay it. The decision hadn't come from nowhere. Over the months of having Zoe in my home, hearing her perspective on our shared family, witnessing her navigate the complex emotions of our situation, something had gradually shifted within me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps a willingness to consider that people could change, that relationships could evolve, that the past didn't have to dictate every aspect of the future. That night, I spoke with Michael about the possibility of Christmas dinner in Portland. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, concern evident in his expression. "That house holds a lot of painful memories for you." "I'm not sure," I admitted. "But I keep thinking about what you said months ago, that I have choices now that I didn't have before. Maybe it's time to choose something different, just to see how it feels." "Then I'm with you," he said simply. "Whatever you decide." As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected journey of the past year. From purchasing my mother's mortgage as an act of power reclamation, to welcoming my sister into my home, to now contemplating a Christmas dinner with the family that had once rejected me, none of it had been planned. None of it followed the script I'd written for my life after leaving Portland. Yet here I was, considering possibilities I'd once firmly closed the door on. Not out of weakness or desperation, but from a position of strength and security. Perhaps that was the most profound transformation of all, the recognition that true power lay not in holding others at a distance, but in engaging on my own terms. From a foundation no one could shake. I didn't know what Christmas would bring. I didn't know if one dinner would lead to further connections or serve as confirmation that some bridges couldn't be fully rebuilt. But I knew that whatever happened, I would be walking into that house, not as the discarded daughter seeking validation, but as the woman who had created her own path and was now choosing, freely and deliberately, which parts of her past to reclaim and which to leave behind. That knowledge, more than anything else, felt like the greatest gift I could give myself this holiday season. The gift of authoring my own story, writing my own ending, and doing so not from a place of pain or resentment, but from the quiet, confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. The drive to Portland on December 23rd felt surreal. Light snow dusted the landscape, transforming the familiar I-5 corridor into something magical and foreign. Michael drove while I sat in the passenger seat, watching the scenery pass and occasionally glancing at Zoe in the back, headphones on, lost in her own thoughts. "Still doing okay?" Michael asked quietly, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I nodded, offering a small smile. "Just processing." The truth was more complicated than I could express. This journey south carried a weight that went beyond holiday obligations. Each mile brought memories, some sharp as glass, others softened by time. I remembered making this same drive in reverse 10 years earlier, a teenager with nothing but uncertainty ahead. Now I was returning as someone entirely different, by choice rather than necessity. We arrived in Portland mid-afternoon. Rather than going directly to my mother's house, we checked into a boutique hotel downtown. My insistence on maintaining separate space a boundary I wasn't yet willing to relinquish. Zoe understood, making no comment when I'd explained our plans to stay in a hotel rather than at the house on Willow Creek Drive. "I should probably head over soon," Zoe said as we settled into our adjoining rooms. "Help Mom with dinner preparations and stuff." "We'll drop you off," I offered, "and then pick you up tomorrow afternoon for the dinner." Zoe hesitated, fingers twisting the strap of her backpack. "Actually, I was thinking, would you want to come in just for a little bit today? Not for anything formal, just to say hi? It might make tomorrow less awkward." The request was reasonable, even thoughtful, but anxiety fluttered in my chest nonetheless. I'd mentally prepared for tomorrow's dinner, scripting potential conversations and planning exit strategies if needed. An impromptu visit hadn't been part of that careful preparation. Michael, sensing my hesitation, stepped in smoothly. "Why don't we all go? We could use a walk after that long drive anyway." His casual framing of the visit as something ordinary, rather than momentous, helped ease the tightness in my shoulders. "Sure," I found myself saying, "just for a few minutes." The house looked different in winter light, smaller than I remembered yet somehow more substantial. Someone had hung a wreath on the door and strung white lights along the porch railing. The basketball hoop over the garage had been repaired since my last visit, and the garden, though dormant for winter, showed signs of recent care. "They've been fixing things up," Zoe explained as we walked up the driveway. "Bob's health is better, so he's been doing projects around the house, and Mom joined some gardening club." Before she could ring the doorbell, the door swung open. My mother stood there, clearly having watched for our arrival through the front window. She wore a red sweater I didn't recognize, her hair styled differently than I remembered. "You came," she said softly, eyes moving from Zoe to me with barely concealed emotion. "All of you." "Just dropping Zoe off," I clarified, keeping my tone light. "And thought we'd say hello since we're here." "Of course," she nodded quickly. "Please, come in. It's cold out there." The interior smelled of pine and cinnamon, holiday scents that triggered memories I'd long suppressed. Decorating a tree when I was 9, baking cookies with my mother before everything changed. The living room had been rearranged since my last visit. The walls repainted a warm beige that brightened the space. Bob appeared from the kitchen, a dish towel in his hands. He'd gained back some of the weight he'd lost during his illness, though. He still moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had faced health challenges. "Emma," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Michael, good to see you both." The lack of effusive greeting was actually a relief. No pretense of easy familiarity, just a straightforward acknowledgement of our presence. "Bob?" I replied with equal simplicity. An awkward silence threatened to descend, but Zoe stepped into the breach. "Mom, I need to show you what I brought for tomorrow, and I think my bag might have gotten wet in the car. Can I throw some things in the dryer?" It was a transparent attempt to give her parents something to focus on besides my presence. and I appreciated the effort. As they moved toward the stairs with Zoe's bags, Michael subtly guided me toward the family photos displayed on a side table. "Is that you?" he asked, pointing to a school photo I didn't recall seeing during my previous visit. I stepped closer, surprised to find not just one, but several photos of me now prominently displayed among the family pictures. My 5th grade school portrait, a snapshot of me and my father at the beach, the same photo I'd carried with me when I left, a picture of me at a science competition in middle school. "They weren't here before," I murmured. "No, they weren't," my mother confirmed, returning to the living room alone. "I put them back up after your last visit. They should have been there all along." The simple acknowledgement that I belonged in the family's visual history, that my absence had been wrong, caught me off guard. I nodded once, unable to formulate a response that wouldn't sound either dismissive or overly emotional. "Coffee?" Bob offered from the kitchen doorway, providing a welcome diversion. "Or hot chocolate? We were just about to have some." "Hot chocolate would be great," Michael answered for both of us, sensing my continuing discomfort with small talk. "Can we help?" The next 20 minutes passed in the careful choreography of people trying to occupy the same space without addressing the elephant in the room. We sipped hot chocolate at the kitchen table while Zoe chattered about her finals and her roommates, filling silences with her cheerful energy. My mother occasionally glanced at me when she thought I wouldn't notice, her expression a complex mixture of hope and resignation. As we prepared to leave, promising to return tomorrow for dinner, Bob stepped forward. "Emma, before you go, there's something in the garage I'd like to show you if you have a minute." Curiosity overcame hesitation. "Sure." The garage was tidier than I remembered, Bob's tools organized on pegboards, holiday decorations stacked neatly in labeled bins. In the corner stood a large object covered with a blue tarp. "I've been working on this," Bob said, removing the tarp to reveal a wooden desk, beautifully crafted with clean lines and a warm cherry finish. "It's for Zoe's apartment when she gets one after the school year, but I wanted you to see it first." I ran my hand along the smooth surface, appreciating the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful. I didn't know you woodworked." "Started after I got sick," he explained, hands in his pockets. "The doctor said I needed something to focus on during recovery. Turns out I have a knack for it." He hesitated, then added, "I made one for you too. It's at the workshop still, getting the final coat of finish. Different design, more suited to your taste. At least, what Zoe tells me your taste might be. No pressure to accept it. I just wanted to make something for you." The gesture was so unexpected, so lacking in obvious manipulation, that I found myself genuinely touched. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." Bob nodded, replacing the tarp carefully. "Wood's good for second chances. You can always sand away mistakes, start fresh with the same piece. Not everything works that way, I know, but some things do." The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was sincere. As we walked back to the house, I found myself considering that perhaps genuine remorse could exist alongside irreparable damage, that the two weren't mutually exclusive. That night in our hotel room, I sat cross-legged on the bed while Michael ordered room service. "You're quieter than usual," he observed, setting aside the menu. "Heavy thoughts." "Just processing," I said, echoing my words from the car. It's strange seeing them in this new context, not as the villains in my story, but as ordinary people who made a terrible choice they now regret. "Does that change how you feel about what happened?" I considered his question carefully. "No. What they did was still inexcusable, but maybe it changes how I think about what happens next." Michael nodded, understanding as always. "Tomorrow's just dinner," he reminded me gently. "One step at a time." Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, sunshine glinting off frost-covered surfaces. We spent the morning exploring Portland, visiting Powell's Books and stopping at a cafe I'd frequented in high school, now under new management, but still serving the same distinctive lavender lattes. As afternoon approached, my anxiety returned, a persistent hum beneath my calm exterior. Michael noticed, of course, offering silent support through gentle touches and understanding glances. By the time we pulled into the driveway on Willow Creek Drive that evening, I had centered myself once more, prepared for whatever the dinner might bring. Zoe met us at the door, radiant in a green dress, her excitement palpable. "Everything smells amazing," she assured us. "And Mom's been cooking all day, so we won't have to make awkward conversation. We can just eat." The dining room had been transformed since my previous visit. The table was elegantly set with what appeared to be new dinnerware, a centerpiece of evergreen branches and candles creating a festive atmosphere. My mother emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron over a simple black dress, her nervous smile revealing how much effort she'd put into the evening. "Welcome," she said, hands clasped tightly together. "Please, make yourselves comfortable. Dinner's almost ready." Bob appeared with a tray of drinks, wine for the adults, sparkling cider for Zoe. "Emma, Michael, what can I get you?" The formality of the greeting, the careful attention to details, the obvious effort to create a perfect evening. It all spoke to how significant this dinner was to them. I accepted a glass of wine, grateful for something to occupy my hands. "Can I help with anything in the kitchen?" I offered, surprising myself with the gesture. Relief flooded my mother's face. "Actually, yes. I could use a hand with the gravy." The kitchen was warm and aromatic, multiple dishes at various stages of completion covering every available surface. My mother moved with practiced efficiency, checking the roast, stirring a pot of cranberry sauce, multitasking with the ease of someone who had prepared countless holiday meals. "The gravy just needs to be whisked a bit more," she said, indicating a saucepan on the stove. "It keeps wanting to separate." I took the whisk, falling into the familiar rhythm of the task. For a few minutes, we worked silently side by side, the cooperation creating a strange intimacy, not the closeness of reconciliation, but the temporary alignment of purpose. "You've gone to so much trouble," I observed as she arranged rolls in a basket. She paused, hands stilling momentarily. "It's not trouble. It's the least I could do. Having you here, even just for dinner, means more than I can say." The simple honesty of her statement hung between us, neither dismissed nor embraced. I continued whisking the gravy, finding comfort in the mechanical motion. "It's ready," I said finally, testing the consistency with a spoon. "Perfect." She nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you, Emma." The dinner itself was remarkable for its ordinariness. We ate roast beef and potatoes, discussed neutral topics like Seattle weather and Zoe's classes, cautiously navigated around anything too personal or potentially contentious. Michael shared stories about his work in UX design, drawing Bob into a conversation about user interfaces that revealed unexpected common ground. Zoe kept the energy light, her natural enthusiasm preventing awkward silences from lingering too long. It wasn't until dessert, a chocolate cake my mother had apparently spent hours perfecting, that the careful facade began to crack. "I have something for both of you," my mother said, setting aside her dessert plate. She disappeared briefly, returning with 2 small gift boxes. "You didn't need to," I began, but she shook her head. "Please, it's Christmas Eve." I accepted the box reluctantly, hyper-aware of everyone watching as I removed the ribbon. Inside, nestled on cotton batting, lay a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a compass rose, its points accented with tiny diamonds. "It was your grandmother's," my mother explained softly. "My mother's. She left it to me with instructions that it should go to you when you were old enough. I should have given it to you years ago." The weight of the heirloom in my palm felt suddenly tremendous, a tangible connection to family history, to a lineage that extended beyond the rupture of my teenage years. Zoe has her locket, my mother continued, indicating the silver pendant Zoe wore. I wanted you both to have something from her. Thank you, I managed, the words inadequate for the complex emotions the gift evoked. It's beautiful. There's something else, Bob said, clearing his throat. He produced an envelope, sliding it across the table. This is for both of you, actually. Zoe doesn't know about this yet either. Puzzled, I opened the envelope to find legal documents inside. Property deeds and transfer papers. We're putting the house in both your names, he explained. His normally gruff voice softened. Equal shares. It needs work, but it's paid off. Now thanks to your loan modification, Emma. When we're gone, it's yours, both of yours, to do with as you see fit. Zoe gasped beside me, clearly as surprised by this revelation as I was. But why now? You're both healthy. You'll live. Here for years. Because it should have always been Emma's home too, my mother said quietly. And this way, there's no question about our intentions. No matter what happens in the future, you both have equal claim to whatever we leave behind. The gesture was both practical and deeply symbolic, an acknowledgement of my place in the family, a concrete effort to correct a profound imbalance. I stared at the papers, unsure how to respond. You don't need to say anything, Bob added quickly. The papers are already filed. It's done. I don't know what to say, I admitted, folding the documents carefully. You don't have to say anything, my mother assured me. Just know that it's there, that you're part of this family, whether you choose to be close to us or not. The moment was saved from becoming too emotional by Zoe, who raised her glass in an impromptu toast. To family, she said simply, however we define it. To family, Michael echoed, his eyes meeting mine with understanding. As the evening drew to a close, my mother walked us to the door while Bob and Zoe remained in the living room, giving us a moment of privacy. Thank you for coming, she said, her composure finally slipping to reveal the depth of emotion she'd been containing. I know it couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, I acknowledged honestly, but I'm glad I came. She nodded, blinking rapidly. Emma, I know one dinner doesn't change the past. I know there's damage that can never be undone. But I want you to know that not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted what happened. Not a single day. The words weren't new. She'd expressed similar sentiments before. But something about this moment, standing in the doorway on Christmas Eve, lent them a weight they hadn't carried previously. I believe you, I said finally. And I did, perhaps, for the first time. She reached out hesitantly, not quite touching me but letting her hand hover in the space between us. Would it be all right if I called you sometimes? Just to check in? No pressure for visits or holidays or anything more than you're comfortable with? The request was so modest, so contrary to the manipulative tactics I'd once feared, that I found myself nodding. That would be okay. Not too often, but sometimes. Relief transformed her expression. Thank you. As Michael and I walked to the car, snow beginning to fall in delicate flakes around us, I felt lighter somehow, not freed from the past, but perhaps less tethered to it. You okay? Michael asked as we drove away, the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror. I think so, I replied thoughtfully. It wasn't perfect. Nothing erases what happened, but maybe perfect isn't the point. What is the point then? He asked. I watched the snowflakes dance in our headlights, considering his question. Maybe it's about writing new chapters without pretending the difficult ones didn't exist. Maybe it's about choosing what kind of person I want to be now, regardless of what was done to me then. Back at the hotel as we prepared for bed, Michael pulled a small box from his suitcase, a gift I hadn't noticed him packing. I was going to wait until tomorrow, he said. but it feels right to give this to you now. Inside the box was a simple platinum ring, elegant in its minimalism. My breath caught as I recognized its significance. "Emma Chen," Michael said, taking my hand. "You are the strongest, most remarkable person I've ever known. The way you've built your life, the integrity you bring to everything you do, the capacity you've shown for growth even when it's difficult, all of it makes me certain that I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled my eyes. Not the painful ones I'd fought back so often in this city, but something entirely different. "Yes," I whispered. "Absolutely yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I realized that my journey had come full circle in ways I could never have anticipated. 10 years ago, I'd left Portland believing I had no family, no support, no foundation upon which to build. Now I was returning to Seattle with not only the sister who had unexpectedly enriched my life, but with a future husband, tentative reconnection with my mother, and a sense of completion I hadn't known I was seeking. The painful parts remained. Some wounds never fully heal. Some betrayals can never be entirely forgotten. But alongside them now existed new possibilities, new connections, new understanding. The story of my life was more complex than the simple narrative of abandonment and triumph I'd clung to for so long. As I drifted toward sleep in Michael's arms, snow falling silently outside our window, I thought about the compass rose pendant now nestled in its box on the nightstand. A compass doesn't erase difficult terrain or remove obstacles from the path. It simply helps you find your way forward, regardless of where you've been. Perhaps that was the greatest gift I'd received this Christmas. Not the pendant itself, not the property deed, not even Michael's ring, precious as it was. The real gift was the recognition that moving forward didn't require forgetting the past or pretending the pain hadn't existed. It simply required knowing where I stood now, who I had become, and choosing my next steps from a place of strength rather than fear. Tomorrow we would drive back to Seattle, to the life I'd built, to the future waiting to unfold. I would carry with me both the scars of what had happened and the possibility of what might still be. Not as contradictions, but as equally valid. Parts of a story still being written, a journey still unfolding, a life fully and finally my own. Spring arrived in Seattle with an explosion of cherry blossoms turning the city into a portrait of pink and white against the backdrop of persistent mountain peaks. 2 years had passed since that Christmas Eve when Michael proposed, and the changes in my life seemed to mirror the cycles of nature, gradual, inevitable, and ultimately renewing. Our wedding had been small and intentional, held at a waterfront restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay with Harry giving me away. Zoe served as my maid of honor, bringing a vibrant energy to the planning process that balanced my more practical approach. My mother attended, sitting quietly in the second row, her presence neither central nor excluded, a careful balance we had both worked to maintain. Today, as I stood in the nursery of our new home, a craftsman bungalow in Seattle's Ravenna neighborhood that we'd spent months renovating, I felt the familiar yet still surprising sensation of peace that had gradually replaced the hypervigilance I'd carried for so many years. "Emma? Where did you put the paint samples?" Michael called from downstairs. "On the kitchen island," I replied, running my hand along the crib we'd assembled the previous weekend. A nursery for a child we hadn't met yet, but who would join. Our family through adoption in approximately 4 months, according to our agency's latest update. The decision to adopt had come naturally to us. My own history made the idea of creating family through choice rather than biology deeply meaningful. When we received the profile of a baby girl in Portland whose young mother had selected us from among dozens of couples, the symmetry felt almost too perfect. Another journey beginning in the city where mine had once been derailed. "Found them," Michael called up, leaning toward the sage green, "but I'll defer to your superior design sense." I smiled, taking one last look at the sunlight streaming through the nursery windows before heading downstairs. Our home was a work in progress, much like the relationships I'd been cautiously rebuilding over the past 2 years. My contact with my mother had evolved into monthly phone calls, stilted at first, then gradually more natural as we established new patterns of interaction. She had visited Seattle twice, staying at a nearby hotel and spending carefully scheduled time with us. We never discussed the past directly anymore. Instead, we focused on creating a relationship that acknowledged our history without being defined by it. Bob remained more peripheral, though not adversarial. He had completed the desk he promised me, which now sat in my home office, a daily reminder that people are capable of change, even if that change comes too late to undo past harm. Zoe had graduated from UW with honors and accepted a position at a tech startup in Bellevue, moving into her own apartment, but remaining a regular presence in our lives. She had become the bridge between my past and present, bringing news from Portland without pressure, sharing family information when relevant while respecting my boundaries. "Earth to Emma," Michael teased as I entered the kitchen. He stood by the island, paint swatches arranged in meticulous order. "You've got that 1,000-yard stare again. Baby thoughts?" "Life thoughts," I corrected, wrapping my arms around him from behind. "Good ones, though." The doorbell rang, interrupting our moment. "That'll be Harry and Zoe," Michael said. "Brunch committee has arrived." Our Sunday brunches had become a tradition, sometimes just the 4 of us. Occasionally, including friends from work or neighbors we'd grown close to. Today's gathering held special significance. We planned to share our adoption news with Harry, who didn't yet know how imminent our parenthood had become. I opened the door to find not only Harry and Zoe on our porch, but my mother as well, standing slightly behind them with an uncertain smile. "Surprise," Zoe said, reading my expression. "Mom was already in Seattle for a gardening conference. I hope it's okay that I invited her to join us." The unplanned appearance of my mother would have once sent me into a defensive spiral. Now, I felt only a mild ripple of adjustment. "Of course," I said, stepping back to let them in. "There's plenty of food." Harry embraced me warmly, his frame more stooped than when we'd first met, but his eyes as sharp and kind as ever. At 78, he'd slowed physically but remained mentally vibrant, still consulting occasionally for tech companies and mentoring young programmers. "The garden looks magnificent," he commented, gesturing to the front yard where I'd recently planted a mix of native shrubs and perennials. "You've got your mother's touch with plants." It was an innocent observation, but one that highlighted how much had changed. 2 years ago, any comparison to my mother would have felt like an unwelcome intrusion. Now, I could acknowledge the genetic and environmental influences that connected us without feeling threatened by them. My mother entered last, carrying a small potted plant. "Bleeding hearts," she explained, offering it to me. "They'll do well in that shady corner by your porch, if you want them, of course." The gesture was characteristic of our recalibrated relationship, thoughtful but undemanding, leaving space for my acceptance or refusal. "They're perfect for that spot," I agreed, accepting the plant. "Thank you for thinking of it." Michael appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Welcome, everyone. Diane, good to see you. This is a nice surprise." My mother's relief at his warm greeting was visible. "I hope I'm not intruding. The conference ended yesterday, and when Zoe mentioned brunch." "You're always welcome," Michael assured her, a statement that wasn't strictly true but reflected our current reality more than our past. As we moved to the dining room, where Michael had laid out a spread of quiche, fruit, and pastries, I caught Zoe giving me a questioning look. I nodded slightly. Yes, we would still share our news as planned, despite the unexpected addition to our gathering. Conversation flowed easily through the first part of the meal. Harry described his latest mentoring project, working with refugee teenagers interested in technology. Zoe shared updates about her work, her excitement about a new product launch evident in her animated gestures. My mother spoke briefly about her gardening conference and a community project she'd joined in Portland, helping to create green spaces in underserved neighborhoods. As we finished eating, Michael caught my eye, silently asking if I wanted to make our announcement. I nodded, reaching for his hand under the table. "We have some news to share," I began, feeling a flutter of excitement. "Our adoption process has accelerated. We've been matched with a baby girl who will be born in July." The reaction was immediate. Zoe's delighted gasp, Harry's broad smile, my mother's hand flying to cover her mouth in surprise. "That's wonderful!" Harry exclaimed, reaching across the table to squeeze my arm. "I had a feeling you were getting close, but July, that's just around the corner." "A baby girl," Zoe repeated, eyes bright. "I'm going to be an aunt." My mother remained silent. Her eyes filled with tears she was clearly trying to contain. I hadn't discussed our adoption plans with her in any detail, mentioning only that we were exploring the possibility. "The birth mother is in Portland, actually," Michael added. "We'll need to be there for the birth and for about 2 weeks afterward, while the interstate paperwork is processed." "Portland?" my mother echoed, finding her voice. "You'll be staying there for 2 weeks?" "That's the plan," I confirmed. "We've arranged for a short-term rental near the hospital." A moment of silence fell over the table, the unspoken question hovering in the air. Zoe, perceptive as always, glanced between my mother and me, waiting to see how this would unfold. "Emma," my mother said carefully, "I would completely understand if this isn't something you'd want, but our house has the extra room now that Zoe's moved out, if you needed a place to stay during that time." The offer hung in the space. Between us, weighted with years of history. Staying in that house, the house I'd been forced to leave, the house where I'd later confronted my mother and Bob, the house that was now partially in my name, seemed almost too symbolically loaded to consider. "Thank you for the offer," I said, my tone measured. "We've already put a deposit on the rental, but I appreciate the thought." My mother nodded, accepting my response without pushing. "Of course, just know the option is there if anything changes. With your plans." "Actually," Michael interjected, giving my hand a subtle squeeze, "we might take you up on having some family meals while we're there. It's going to be an intense time, and not having to worry about cooking would help." I shot him a quick glance, but his suggestion made practical sense. It also offered a middle path, acknowledging my mother's gesture without committing to the intimacy of staying in her home. "We'd love that," my mother said, visible relief in her expression. "Whatever would be helpful during that time." The conversation shifted to practical aspects of preparing for a newborn. Harry promised to set up the best baby monitor system technology could provide. Zoe immediately began planning a visit to Portland during our stay. My mother offered tentative suggestions about baby essentials, careful not to overstep. As they collaborated on clearing the table despite my protests, I stepped outside onto our back deck, needing a moment to process the convergence of past and future that our news had catalyzed. The April air was cool, but not uncomfortable, carrying the scent of the rhododendrons blooming along our fence line. Our yard backed up to a small green belt, giving the space a secluded feeling despite being in the city. I'd spent hours here, planting native species and creating a sanctuary that reflected my journey. Structured yet organic, planned yet allowing for natural growth and change. "You okay?" Michael asked, joining me with 2 mugs of tea. He handed me one, the ceramic warm against my palms. "I'm good," I assured him. "Just thinking about how life comes full circle sometimes." "Your mom seemed genuinely happy about the baby," he observed. "And she didn't push when you declined the housing offer." "I noticed that too," I acknowledged. 2 years ago, I would have assumed any offer from her had strings attached. Now, I think she genuinely just wanted to help. "People can change," Michael said, leaning against the railing beside me. "Not always, Not completely, but sometimes enough to matter. I sipped my tea, considering his words. What do you think about her offer, honestly? He took his time responding, one of the qualities I most valued in him. Honestly? I think staying in a rental gives us independence and space, but I also think having some support while we're navigating those first days with the baby could be valuable. Your mother seems to have learned to respect your boundaries, letting her provide some meals, maybe spend some time with the baby under your terms. It could be good for everyone. Including our daughter, I added quietly. The word still felt new on my tongue, daughter. In the abstract discussions of adoption, we'd talked about the baby or the child. But now, with a specific baby girl on the way, daughter had begun to materialize as a concrete reality. A person who would have her own needs, her own story, her own relationships. What kind of relationship do you want her to have with your family? Michael asked, the question we'd circled but never directly addressed. I watched a robin land on our bird feeder, considering the complexity of the question. I want her to have what I didn't: extended family who love her, who show up consistently, who put her needs first. But I also want to protect her from any dysfunction or patterns that might hurt her. So, a relationship with boundaries, Michael summarized, which is exactly what you've been building with your mother these past 2 years. The parallel hadn't escaped me. In many ways, my careful reconstruction of a relationship with my mother had been a practice run for the kind of balanced family dynamics I hope to create for our daughter. Acknowledging imperfections while establishing clear expectations and limits. I think we can have some family meals in Portland, I decided. Maybe even let them meet the baby once we're settled. But we keep the rental. We maintain our space. Michael nodded, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. One step at a time. That's how we've approached everything else. When we returned inside, the kitchen had been cleaned, and our guests had moved to the living room. Harry was explaining something about neural networks to Zoe, who listened, with the focused attention she always gave him. My mother sat slightly apart, looking at the photographs displayed on our mantel. Our wedding, a hiking trip to Mount Rainier, Zoe's graduation, a candid shot of Harry and me at his 75th birthday celebration. She turned as we entered, her expression softening. Your home is beautiful, Emma. It feels peaceful. Thank you, I replied, recognizing the accuracy of her observation. Peace had been elusive for so much of my life, first in the tension-filled years before I left Portland, then in the struggle to survive and establish myself in Seattle. Creating a home that embodied tranquility had been a conscious choice, a testament to how far I'd come. I was telling your mother about the adoption preparation classes you've been taking, Zoe said, guiding the conversation back to safer territory, and the ridiculous amount of research you've done on developmental psychology. Emma's always been thorough, Harry chuckled. She approached learning to code the same way, researching everything, understanding all the underlying principles, before writing a single line. She was like that even as a little girl, my mother added hesitantly, testing the waters of shared memories. She read every book on dinosaurs in the library before deciding which one she wanted for her birthday. The observation might once have felt like an unwelcome intrusion, a claim on memories she'd forfeited the right to share. Now, it simply felt like a small truth, neither threatening nor particularly significant, just one tile in the mosaic of who I'd been and who I'd become. The afternoon continued pleasantly, our conversation moving between practical baby preparations and Harry's stories of his early days in tech. When it was time for everyone to leave, I found myself walking my mother to her car while the others lingered on the porch. Thank you for including me today, she said as we reached her rental car. I know it wasn't planned. It worked out fine, I replied, meaning it. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. Emma, I want you to know that I Understand if you never want your daughter to call me grandma or have any real relationship with me.